Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto. I'm a photographer and a Lumix ambassador based in Helsinki, Finland. In this video, I'm gonna find out if the 80 megapixel high-res mode of the Lumix G9 is a match for the native 47 megapixels of the Lumix S1R. And because this is all about the resolution, I also decided to make this video in 4K. If you like this 4K content, please let me know in the comments down below and I'll make more 4K content for you guys. So, the test cameras are here. The S1R, the G9 and the test scene is over there. I chose this scene outside here because it's a nice mixture of man-made structures and some trees. And as we all know, trees with their moving foliage is a challenge for any multi-shot, the high-res type of camera or feature like the one in the G9. And there's also one in the S1R that makes 187 megapixel file, and who knows, maybe I'll try that also today. But let's get going and get the shot so we can see if this is a match for this. I'm using the kit lens on both cameras. On the S1R I have the 24-105 f4 kit lens, and on the G9 I have the 12-60 millimeter Panasonic Leica lens. The reason I'm using these lenses is that for the S1R I only have this one native lens, and these are the only lenses that are easy to match the angle of view so that I get the similar image on both cameras. And while these lenses are probably not the absolutely best lenses for these cameras, they are still pretty good, and I'm using the crop from the very center of the image to compare these cameras, so the resolution of the lenses should not be any big problem here. I'm gonna start with the S1R. I'm gonna use 24 millimeter focal length. I'm at f8 and I will match the exposure time so that I get a proper exposure. On the G9 I'm gonna use similar focal length so that I get the same framing, but I'm gonna use f4 so I get the same amount of depth of field on both cameras. Okay, let's check the focus one more time. There it is at f8, 250th of a second, and the exposure seems to be spot on. Right. By the way, I'm using ISO 200 also on the S1R, so that's the same as on the G9 because the lowest ISO for the G9 is ISO 200. Okay, the first shot is out of the way. Let's switch cameras. I only have one quick release plate, so I have to switch that too. I guess I have to get more of these now that I have too many cameras. Alright, now I only have to match the framing. In theory, I should get the same framing just by using 12 millimeter focal length on my G9, but it's not that simple because lenses angle of view is measured diagonally. So I'm gonna have to zoom in just a tad to get the same framing as I did with the S1R and the 24 millimeter focal length. I'm pretty close now. I have the S1R picture here on the screen so I can check it. I guess I just take a couple of different framings so I get it right. Alright, that's the last high-res shot on the G9 today. Let's pack up these cameras, head back to my office and check out these images on a big screen and see how much difference there is between the shots. And it was about time too. The light is changing rapidly. There are some clouds showing up and the scene is not going to be the same for much longer. So it's a good time to pack up. Okay, I just uploaded the pictures onto my computer. But before I continue, may I remind you that you can subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and please also click the bell icon down there so you'll get notified every time I post a new video. But now let's go back to the topic of the day. But let's first remember two things. This is not a scientific test, this is more like a real world test. I would imagine that you might be using the high-res mode of the G9 for something like this similar scene, landscape, cityscape or something like that. Maybe not this particular scene because this is not spectacular enough, but this has all the elements there. And another thing is that there are so many different type of situations and scenarios that it would be impossible to cover them at least in one single video. So this is only one example, but this is going to give us some kind of idea how the high-res mode of the G9 compares to the S1R. It's not easy to compare these images because the pixel dimensions of the files are so different. So I created 3 different comparisons, and then in this first one I downsampled the G9 high-res picture to match the 47 megapixel picture of the S1R. And here are the results at 100%. And to my eyes they look pretty similar. The amount of detail is really similar on both in both images. Also, there was not that much wind out there when I was shooting, and it looks to me that you can really well use the high-res mode also outside if it's not too windy. But of course you have no control over the wind, but nevertheless if it's not windy, I think it works really well. However, when I was shooting there was a person walking across the scene and you can see her here and it doesn't look pretty, and you can of course avoid that with the S1R because you can use any shutter speed and you don't even need a tripod to get that 47 megapixels. But in this case, in this comparison, this first one, the results are pretty similar, and the high-res mode of the G9 is working really well. And let's move to the second comparison. In this case, I upsized or upresed the S1R 47 megapixel file to match the high-res file from the G9. And here are the results at 100%. First of all, it seems to me that the S1R picture or file handles the uppressing pretty well, even though uppressing is generally considered not a very good idea. The amount of detail in both pictures looks very similar again in this case, but I think there is tiny bit of more detail in the G9 file or picture, but the difference is not that big, so it's a bit surprising that the 47 megapixel upres 47 megapixel file looks this good compared to the 80 megapixel high-res picture from the G9. Maybe the G9 has a slight edge, but it's not very big. I'm actually a bit surprised here because I thought the G9 high-res picture would look much better in this comparison. So far so good, but now let's take a look at the final comparison, final ultimate comparison. In this one I have the high-res file from the S1R, and I also have the high-res file from the G9, but the G9 file I had to upscale or upres to match the S1R picture. Both files are massive, almost 190 megapixels, and these are the results at 100%. First of all, I have to say that the G9 picture looks pretty good on its own. I'm surprised how well it upscales to this really enormous size. But when compared to the S1R file, there's no question which one is better, which one has more detail. The S1R file has just so much detail, incredible amount of detail. Look at the grille of the car, for example. You can clearly see the vertical lines there that have disappeared almost completely from the G9 file, for example. And also, if we take a look at the lamp up here, there's so much more detail in the S1R file. But still, I have to say I'm also impressed with the G9 file, that it looks so good. It's already a high-res, like a multi-file shot, and it's up-res to this almost 190 megapixels, and it still looks this good. My conclusion here is that the G9 high-res file is impressive. And it's a match at least to a 50 megapixel native file from a full-frame camera when it comes to sharpness and resolution. There are some limits how to use the high-res mode, the subject movement and all that. But if you occasionally need high megapixel count and you can live with those restrictions, then it's very, very usable indeed. But if you need high megapixel file on a regular basis, I recommend to get the S1R. That's your solution. Then it makes life so much more easier and it's so much more convenient to use. And with that camera you still have the option of getting the almost 190 megapixel high-res file if you occasionally need that large file. But what about you guys? Have you used the high-res mode on your Lumix G9 or your S1R? And what kind of experiences you have? Please let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.